Welcome, fans. We are live once again on the Cheap Eat Productions podcast empire. My name is Jack Kilby, No Gimmicks Guy on the socials, here on our flagship Sunday show. And we've got a very special guest, a man who really had quite a career in the golden era, as I like to call it, of professional wrestling, not only in the WWWF, WWF, Japan, other territories. He really touched the business at an integral period in history, and I'm talking about none other than Irish Davy O'Hannon. Davy, thanks for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you, Jack. I'm very flattered that you would ask me to be on such a well-regarded forum, and I do appreciate it.
Well, we certainly have a lot to cover and a lot of fan questions that have been sent to me, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about a man that you teamed with several times in Japan in the 80s, the early 80s, who we recently lost, and that is, of course, the great Hulk Hogan, and your memories of working with him and the man himself.
Yeah, well, Terry and I were good friends. I met him when he came to I think we were still the WWF, or we were the WWF. So I met him when he came there, and it's a big new territory for guys that haven't been around. There's a lot going on, and he actually was making his first Japan trip with me. Not just me, a bunch of guys, but I was the one from the New York territory that was going over. And Vince Sr. Took me on a side and said, listen, he's a good boy and he's going to Japan for the first time. Could you maybe kind of babysit him and show him around over there a little bit? It's a whole different world. Wrestling, sumo, of course, was their national sport. But our business was pretty well regarded, and it was very popular. So, we got a lot of attention. And, because of Terry's appearance, he also got a lot of attention. He was a big, big guy. So we made his first Japan trip over there together. And it was kind of neat. We were there for either 4 or 6 weeks. I don't recall. But it was, it was good. He was good.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of folks don't really focus on, which was how much of a phenomenon he became in Japan. And I know you did some tags with him and
Yes.
6-man tags, and he was still very green in his career. Was that kind of your role to be the ring general for your team?
Well, you know what? He had worked a little bit. He was broken in by Hiro Masuda. And if you're going to get broken in by somebody, wow, there was the guy. He was the real deal. And, he was broken in when the old timers still had a very, very deep respect and regard for our business. And we protected it at all costs. So when Terry finally got up here, he had already worked in a couple of the territories down there. So he kind of knew his way around. He was an okay amateur, so he could also protect himself. But Japan, like I said, was a whole different animal for guys that didn't know what was going on. Now, it wasn't my first trip, so I had already known how to handle things. I'm not positive of the date we went over, but I am pretty sure it might have been 1980, but I'm pretty sure it was the year that the United States, boycotted the Olympics for whatever reason. And I also don't recall what the reason was. So we boycotted the Olympics, and because it was the United States, a lot of our allies followed. And the Japan amateur wrestlers, i.e. their Olympic guys, weren't really terribly thrilled about this and about us. And our very first night over there, we were in a 6-man tag. It was Terry, myself, and the Iron Sheik. And We started the match, and I know it was one of their Olympic guys. I don't know who else was in it. Uh, and we got in there, and I started, and we went to lock up, and I kind of opened up my body for this guy, and he gave me the hardest kick uh, below the belt that I had ever gotten. And I played football, and I did a lot of wrestling, and sometimes there's accidents and sometimes there's intentionals. But this was the hardest kick I had ever gotten. And down I went, and I curled up, and I was trying not to get sick in the ring. So I rolled over and put my hand up for a tag. And Terry took the tag, and I just rolled under the bottom rope. And I was on the apron trying to stand myself up. And Hogan dragged this guy over, and he put some shots on him like I could feel him. He was pounding him, beating him like a drum. And Iron Sheik, old Cottrell, for the dangerous guy that he was, had a really neat kind of squeaky voice. When I finally started to stand up, and I could only get to my knees, he said to me, "Davy, it's receipt time. Watch this." I said to myself, "Oh boy, this guy's going to have a big problem here." And after Hogan pounded him for a couple of minutes, Sheiky got in there and posted his head on the mat. And what that means is the guy was on his back, and he put his hand up under his neck so he couldn't move his head. He couldn't get up, and he had his knee over his chest. And as I'm watching, he went and plucked his eye. Popped his eye. Let's see, which one would it have been? His left eye. He plucked his left eye right out.
Wow.
Right, and they do come out. It didn't fall all the way down, but it was out. And I went, "Oh, Jesus. What the oh, this is going to be some trip. We got 4 weeks to spend with these guys." But it was an easy trip after that, So, we got in the dressing room, and Terry went, "Wow, man, I never saw something like that before." I said, "Well, I knew about it, because when you learn how to protect yourself, there's things you learn how to do to give somebody what we used to call, you'd give them the office. It's a little signal we had to say either lighten up or something bad is about to happen to you if you keep it up, or for all different reasons. But I never saw it like right there go all the way intentionally. I know Stan Hansen knocked out Vader's eye in Japan actually one time, but it was Stan was a great guy, except he was dangerous. But he was good. He was convincing for our business. So the rest of the trip was good. Terry handled himself very well. In Japan back then, when you got in the ring, you were in for a fight every night. It was like working in the Dallas territory. The Von Erichs used to have to grab him once in a while and say, "Hey man, do I owe you money?" And why? Because you're beating the crap out of me. That's why.
Was that Kevin?
That was all of them. Well, not David. I worked with David, and David, rest his soul, all their souls. His David Von Erich's only Madison Square Garden appearance was against me. So David was the best worker in the family. He was the best worker in the family. I don't know. The rest of them, sort of like they believed it. We believed it because we wanted the fans to believe it, but we also wanted to go to work the next night. So you didn't want to kill somebody. But Terry handled it well, and he was a popular guy in the dressing room. You always have somebody that it's like any job that you sort of don't get along with people once in a while. But he made money for everybody on the card. Don't forget when you draw a house, it trickles down, and everybody makes money. When guys got their bookings, the first thing you do, especially in New York, it was a big book. Sometimes they ran 3 towns a night. The first thing you would do is say, okay, listen, I'm booked in the Cap Center in Washington, Landover, Maryland. You'd look to see who's on top. If Bruno was there, or at the time Terry, or if Andre was in town, you knew you were getting a pretty good crowd. So he was a popular guy in the dressing room with the fans, even when he was a heel. And he learned never to step out of character. Back then, if I never stepped out of character when I was a heel, ever. But he didn't turn down an autograph when he was a baby face. Never, ever. He would stay. Sometimes in airports, you're trying to hustle a little bit. He would stop. One time I heard a story where finally he had to say to somebody, "They're closing the door. I gotta get in here." And whoever it was, the father, really knocked his jock off because he turned down an autograph. Well, he just signed 200 of them.
Mm-hmm.
So he was an okay guy. Everybody's got a ghost in their closet, man. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got one. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah, without Hogan, there wouldn't be the heights that the business achieved. Purist is asking, since we're on Japan, the difference between Giant Baba and Inoki as owners, in your estimation.
Well, Baba was an old timer. He's the one I worked for both of them. So the first trip I went for Baba. And somebody smartened me up and said, listen, if you think he doesn't understand or speak English, don't make that mistake, because he knows exactly what's going on. But he had a fellow there, a referee and an officer in the company named Joe Higuchi, who was a wonderful guy and took good care of us. And kind of, I was a new guy then, for Japan, and pointed you in the right direction. So Baba was an old-time guy like Vince Sr. was, where if there was a problem, listen, Lou Albano, who was a very dear friend, I think he got fired 14 times with Vince Sr. And he'd get fired, and the next day he'd talk to him, and Vince would say, all right, Lou, just smarten up, come on back. Well, Baba was much like that. In fact, I was my first week there. I was working with I don't know who, and we were in a ring, and Joe Higuchi leaned down to me and said, "Davey, start wrestling more," because I was just doing some heel stuff. Start wrestling more. Fortunately, I have an amateur background, so I could wrestle more. I thought I was in trouble when the next day Joe Higuchi came to the dressing room and said, "Listen, the boss would like to see you." Oh, man. Now, somewhere I posted it. Our contract had rules that you had to follow, and there were rules for the guys, how they dressed, how they acted. It was a professional organization. So I'm saying to myself, what in the world did I do to get this guy calling me in the office? And on top of that, Bruno is the fellow that sent me to Japan. That's who booked me there. I was really close with Bruno, and he gave me an opportunity to go there. And I said to Joe Higuchi, you got to tell me before I go, how do I show respect? You don't stick your hand out and say, "Hey, Baba," you don't. So he told me what to do, how to bow. There's different types of bows. One for acknowledgement, one for deep respect, things like that. So he told me what to do. I walked in and I said, hello, Baba-san. And I saw my contract on his desk. And in that contract, there's a clause that says if you do something, they tear it up, you go back on a plane and you're done. And he picked up my contract and he tore it up. And I went, oh my God. I mean, this is, now no, not only am I getting tossed out of Japan, what am I going to say to my friend Bruno when I get home? Uh, and he took out a new contract and he gave me a $1,000 a week raise.
Mm.
Well, maybe they liked the way I worked, or, good possibility. Bruno said, hey, he's a good boy, a good friend of mine. That's more likely, I think.
Mhm.
But so Baba was an old timer, and you always had access to him. Inoki, you didn't have so much access. You didn't. He had people that were kind of a buffer. Uh, he was a serious guy. If you got in a ring with Baba, you knew you weren't getting hurt. If you got in a ring with Inoki, which I did on many occasions, uh, you had to be serious about it, which I always was. I never did what we called a cartoon in the ring, ever. Didn't matter who was there, and if somebody tried to do it, I would get them close enough to say, "Yeah, wrong guy, can't do this. I'm trying to convince these people what's going on." So Inoki was I won't say more serious, because Baba was serious about his business, and it was very successful. But Inoki wasn't as close to the boys as Baba was.
Makes sense. Carmela from Carmela's Wrestling Radio relived. A friend of the show is saying that you look awesome, and always love you, Dave. I know she's interviewed you in the
Well,
past too.
I don't look as awesome as Carmela, the first lady of wrestling radio. I know Carmela for about 200 years, I guess. Uh, she's a wonderful person. She's highly respected in our business by the guys that were in it. So if Carmela's actually watching, hi Carmela. Haven't talked to you in a while, but Carmela, it's nice and sunny. I got 2 beach days in so far, and we're hoping the hot, stay late weather lasts for another 3 years.
Yeah, I hear you. To rewind the tape a little bit, you were a very big wrestling fan growing up. From my research, you saw Bruno beat Buddy Rogers
Oh yeah.
in the Garden. How
Yep.
how did you translate that fandom into deciding to be a wrestler yourself? And can you talk about that old school training process that is so different from today?
Well, yeah, I was, like I said, I turned into a fan. I had whatever age it is that kids usually get the measles in school. I got them, and I was home. And, I'm sitting on a couch uh, and had to get up to change the channel back then. And I'm switching around, and I saw wrestling on television. Uh, Now, my family, both sides, were in the newspaper and magazine business, and a professional courtesy for when one of the delivery trucks went by your house in a particular neighborhood, they would toss a paper. If my dad was off from work, he'd get the paper. And one day somebody tossed some magazines and comic books. Well, I always got the comic books because the guys distributed them to the store. So, we got those. And in those comic books was the old Ring boxing magazine. And I was looking through it, and in the back, there were a few pages devoted to wrestling. And I looked at it and I went, oh, wait a minute. I think these were the guys that I saw on the television the other day. And, so I put two and two together and went back and watched the television and started to become a fan. And I said to myself, this is what I want to do. I never wanted to do anything else in my life than become a professional wrestler. So as I got older, I watched more. I'd ride my bike to the candy store, or if get a hold of my dad while he was home. But if I remembered, I'd say to him, "Could you bring home some wrestling magazines?" So he would. I'd ride to the candy store, 50 cents. There was a whole bunch of wrestling magazines you could buy. So I'd take my newspaper route money and go buy a wrestling magazine. And little by little, I kind of realized what was going on here, except I wasn't smart like the people are now. Uh, and my father worked at night on the weekends because that's when the newspapers were big. So my mom actually took me to Madison Square Garden to see Bruno and Buddy Rogers. So I was there for that, and uh, it was an unbelievable experience. The old garden had a lot of character, and these guys were bigger than life. So I saw that, and it cemented what I wanted to do in my head. So eventually, I got old enough to go myself. I was going to college. I went to Missouri from New Jersey, and I would go to the arenas and I'd bug the promoter. I'd bang on it. Hey, I want to be a wrestler. And every one of them would say to me, all right, kid, go to college, come back, and we'll see what we can do. So Arnold Skolin said that to me in New Jersey once. Go to college. Talk to me when you're done. So I went out to school, and I was in Missouri, and I wrestled in school, and I played football. And I would get on the bus, go up to Kansas City to see the wrestling up there at the Kansas City War Memorial. The promoter was Gus Karras. Uh, One of the partners was a guy named Bob Geigel. And, I'd watch them, and I'd watch Harley, and I saw Harley race and Pat O'Connor in a match. My God, if there's any question about what I want to do, it's answered. It's this stuff. So I got on the bus another day. The show was on Thursday night at the Kansas City War Memorial, and took the bus up there. And about 2 in the afternoon, banged on the back door. I had a suitcase that had a pair of my college wrestling tights, my shooting shoes, my toothbrush. That was it. I didn't have anything else. And somebody that worked there opened the door, said, "Yeah." I was big. I was 260 pounds. I was an inch taller than I am now. He said, "You a wrestler?" I said, "Yeah, I am." I was a wrestler. I had nothing to do with the wrestling business, though. He said, "Okay, come on in." So he lets me in and brings me to the dressing room. He says, "Hey, we're right here." So, it's now about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Show starts at 7. So I'm sitting there saying, "Oh, what do I do now?" I don't know. There's nobody around. Place is dark. I looked out. I said, "Wow, how cool is that?" I'd never been really close to the ring. So I walked down, and, it's a surreal feeling. So I went back, and I'm sitting in this little cubby that's a dressing room, and I could hear people coming. And the first two guys that walked in were Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch. They were working as the Outlaws in the NWA, in the Kansas City territory. So, protocol is when you are new, you'd walk in a dressing room, introduce yourself. So I knew who they were because I saw them on television. I saw them in magazines. So Dusty came in and said, "Hey, Rhodes." I said, "Oh, wow, nice to meet you." Murdoch called everybody Gabe. Didn't matter what your name was. "Hey, Gabe, what's happening?" So he says, "Hey, Gabe." So they both stood there and they said, "You got a name?" I went, "Oh, yeah, Davy. My name's Davy." "Oh, okay, kid." So they sat down. Then I heard somebody else come in, and it turned out to be Geigel and Gus Karras. So I said, "Oh, okay." They came to the door and they said, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" Oh, because this was, you got to understand, this was 1971. Kayfabe was, the dressing room was a sacred place. Nobody got in there. So I looked at Geigel. I said, "Arnold Skolin sent me to see you." So he looked at me. He said, "You know Skolin?" I said, "Well, yeah." I had no. I only knew Skolin because I was bugging him, every 2 weeks. He said, "Yeah, well," I said, "Well, Skolin said you can get me some work while I'm out here." He said, "You're in the business?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "All right, just sit tight, go watch the show or something. We'll see you when it's done." Okay, so now I got a problem. how am I going to finish up this lie that I just told? So the show ended. I went back down and I'm looking for Geigel. He says, where are you staying? I went, well, I don't know. I said, I go to school down in Missouri. He said, where? I said, Columbia. Oh, that's 90 miles from Kansas City. He says, tell you what, come with me. Puts me in a car, or we get in a car. Lady wrestler named Betty Nikolai was in the car. She said, oh, new boy? I guess so, yeah. And they take me to Kansas City, in the city. In Missouri, actually, the War Memorial was in Kansas City, Kansas. So they said, well, we'll stay here. Okay, I'll stay here. I was coming up from college. I mean, I don't know how much money I even had with me. I can tell you it wasn't a lot. So Geigel goes to the desk and says, I got a friend of mine here. You got to give him a room. And I can hear him say, $8. No. He's not giving you $8 for that room. So it turns out I gave him $4 to stay that night in the Senator Hotel in Kansas City. Met him in the morning. He took me for breakfast because by then he figured out that I didn't have any money. Took me for breakfast and said, so you want to work? I said, yeah, I do. He said, okay, be in Sedalia, Missouri, Tuesday at about 6:30. Sedalia was not that far from where I was in school. So to shorten the story, I show up in Sedalia, sitting in a dressing room. By then I had bought a pair of boxing shoes that were a little higher than my shooting shoes. And I had my singlet from school. And Geigel came in. He said, oh, you showed up. Okay. He said, okay, you guys are going to be on first. Guy named Joe Scarpello. Holy crap. I never heard of Joe Scarpello except I saw him on television. Joe Scarpello was an AAU champ, NCAA, good boxer, World War II hero, pilot and everything. And, keep in mind now, I wasn't smart. The guys back then did not smarten you up because they didn't want new guys in the business. You took somebody's place. And I had heard some terminology in the room. I heard work. I heard shoot. I knew what shoot is because I was a shooter. The referee was an old timer named Ronnie Etchison. And we get in the ring and Ronnie says, Ronnie had a voice that sounded like he had an ice skate stuck in his throat. He says, all right, you two. He says, we're going to get about 8 minutes. So I leaned forward and I said, are we shooting or working? And Ronnie Etchison looked at me and looked at Joe Scarpello and went, oh, Christ, here we go. Joe Scarpello leaned forward and said, kid, just take your best hold. So for the next 7 minutes or so, I realized that I did not have a best hold. Joe Scarpello absolutely tied me in knots. He did things that I didn't even know could be done with a body. He didn't hurt me, but he let me know that he could. And when we got done, I'm back in the dressing room and I'm sitting on a bench, kind of leaning forward, and somebody slaps me on the back of the neck. It was Joe Scarpello walking by, and he said, see you tomorrow, kid. And a little voice in my head said, maybe not. This wasn't exactly what I thought I was looking at on television here and when I went to a match. So I did go back. Geigel said, you want to do it again? I said, yeah, yes, sir, I do. He said, be in St. Joe for TV on Friday night. And then Saturday night, you'll go to Waterloo. I said, okay. So I think I got $10 or $15 for Joe Scarpello tying me up. I got on the bus again, and I went to St. Joe, Missouri, where they did their TV tapes. And I was sitting in the dressing room in a corner by myself, minding my business. And Geigel came by with Bob Brown and said, oh, you're back. Okay, he says, you got an easy one tonight. He says, the guy you're with is going to take care of it all. You'll see him. His name is Lou. Lou says, Little did I know how this wasn't working out for me very well. So Luthez came over and introduced himself. He didn't have to do that. I knew who Luthez was. And I said, nice to meet you, sir. He said, so I hear you're a shooter. I said, well, I know how to wrestle. I know how to wrestle. I knew not to be a smart ass with them, because you could see, that was their own little fraternity in that dressing room. And if you were an outsider, you felt like it. I said, well, yeah, I said, I know how to wrestle. That's all. So he said, listen, kid, he said, when we start, he said, I may shove you back into the ropes and give you a slap in the face, which is a big no-no for an athlete any place. So I just said, well, Mr. Thez, I said, if you do that, I'm going to slap you right back. So he just kind of looked at me and smirked and walked away. So we got in the ring. He did not slap me in the face. He did a whole bunch of other things that also let me know that I was an outsider in the business. He was such a smooth guy. He'd put his elbow on your ear and hit it. Whoa! How in the world did that happen? So I think we did 6 minutes. Of course, I put him over. I didn't know what to do. And the next night, I worked with Danny Hodge,
Mm-hmm.
and the most wonderful guy you ever want to meet. A legend in wrestling, but a legend in amateur wrestling too. The Hodge Award, like the Heisman Trophy, is named for Danny Hodge. And he's the best there is. So we wrestled for a while. We did some amateur stuff, working, which I still didn't know what work was. I just didn't know. We did that. And then I came back on a break from school to New Jersey, and I went to a match in a place called the Asbury Park Convention Hall down the shore. And I went to Arnold Skolin, and I said, I went to college like you told me. I said, and I'm in the business. Bob Geigel told me to see you. The rest of that big lie that I was making up. And he went, you went Geigel? And he said, you were in Kansas City? I said, yeah, I worked in Kansas City. He went, all right. He says, he says, be at Philadelphia TV Tuesday night. Oh, okay. And turned out to be Tony Gurria's first night in the New York territory. And here I was working on TV with Tony Gurria, except Tony Gurria is one of the best workers ever in the business. And Davey still didn't know what work was. I wasn't smart. Nobody smartened me up. Skolin just walked by me and said, get about 7, get his hand up. Well, okay, I could figure that out. And I worked with Tony Gurria. Now, I'm sure everybody at some point that's watching wrestling figured out that we had a way in the ring. We'd all work on the left side. You didn't grab somebody. This was called the wrong side, but I didn't know that. And a couple of times during the match, I saw Tony Gurria kind of go like, whoa, who is this? Because I was bigger and stronger. And so we finished the match, blah, blah, did what I had to do. And I always went and watched the matches if I was in the arena. I'd find a place where I could watch. And I was sitting up in the old Philadelphia arena, and we could sit in a little area that was dark and there was no people. And sitting behind me was a guy named Don Jardine, spoiler. And he said to me, hey, kid, he says, I just watched you there. He said, you work European style sometimes, huh? He says, yeah, I saw you grab him on the right side. Grab him on the right. Let me go back and watch again. And I watched and I said, all these guys are working on the left side. Then I went in the dressing room and I got a couple of wrestling magazines. Left arm, left arm, left arm. Oh, I get it. That's how I learned. There were no wrestling schools. It was on-the-job training for me. But because I made sure that I didn't have an attitude, the old-timers would say to you, if they saw you work, or wrestle in my case, if they saw you, they'd say, would you mind if I gave you a little constructive criticism? And if you had an ounce of brain in your head, you said, yes, please, come with me. And they'd walk you to a area nobody was at so they didn't embarrass you, take you in a shower and say, okay, why don't you do this? Try this, try that. Blackjack Mulligan and Lanza were great. They helped me out. Dominic Danucci, Mike Cicluna, so many guys, so many. Manny Soto, Johnny Rods, Pete Sanchez would all take you on the side and say, why don't you do this, try that. And that's how I learned. I learned by working every single night and watching. I watched matches all the time. So,
wow, that's an incredible
sorry
story.
if that was too long-winded.
No. That's an incredible story, and what a contrast to today. It's a real feather in your cap that you were able to break in that way and navigate those waters, so to speak. What was your first impression when you met Vince Sr. and contrasting him from your firsthand perspective with Vince Jr. at the time?
Well, Vince Sr. was a very classy, sophisticated, low-key guy. He was all business, very serious, but he was kind of a compassionate guy, like I told you. Lou would get in trouble all the time. I got in trouble a couple of times. One of them was the night with David Von Erich in the Garden because I refused to put him over. I had just come back from Texas. And, if you're a heel in Texas, every single night, let me put this, let me see how I can beat you 2 straight with this and not get hurt. So when I saw the book in the Garden, when I got my bookings, it said Von Erich. I said to myself, oh, crap. Is Fritz coming up here to work one night? Because they used to do that. They bring somebody in as a favor, that from a different territory. It was a novelty for the people. And so I'm saying to myself, well, for sure, I'm not putting Fritz Von Erich over in Madison Square Garden when I just got through Amarillo, Dallas, all those places, and saw Von Erich's every night of the week. I said, that's just not happening. So I found out it was David Von Erich. That didn't change my brain. So Skolin, who was the agent in the Garden, came into the dressing room and said, Davey, he says, I need you to get 12 or 14 and get his hand up. I said, not doing it. So Skolin said, that's what he did. He went, what? I said, I'm not putting him over. In the Garden, in the territory that I live in, Madison Square Garden, cable TV at the time. I said, I just got back from Texas. I put a Von Erich over twice a week or twice a night for weeks. I said, no, I'm not doing that. So Skolin says, well, you got to do that. No, I don't. No, I don't. He goes, Jesus Christ. So he walks out and Vince Sr. comes back in. And Vince says to me, Davey, I can't believe what I'm hearing. I said, well, Mr. McMahon, I said, I'm not the promoter's son. I said, so I know why this is going on. I said, now little did I know. See, that was my bad attitude period in the business. Little did I know that David Von Erich was getting a big push for the NWA belt. One of the stupidest moves I ever made was to cause trouble, because if I had a really good one in the Garden with David Von Erich, I might have been going somewhere else to have good ones. So anyway, I said, no, not happening. And Vince Sr. said, well, what's the problem? I said, well, number one, am I getting the same money that David Von Erich is getting? I already knew the answer to that was no. He said, well, if it's a money thing, I'll take care of it. He took a roll out of his pocket and he said, there. Now, I already knew what he was getting. So I said, okay. I said, that's better. I said, did you pay his trans up here? He said, well, I did. I said, okay, well, I need my trans. He said, you came in from New Jersey. I said, well, the Lincoln Tunnel is $1. I said, and the New Jersey Turnpike is $2.80 round trip. I said, you owe me another $3.80. And he looked at me and he went, I can't even believe I'm hearing this. I said, yep. So he takes out a $5 bill and gives it to me. He says, that'll cover it. I said, I'll get you the change as soon as I'm done. He said, are we all set? I said, no, not really. I said, no, I'm not putting them over right in the middle. He said, what? I said, not going to be clean. I said, we can do a double count out. We could do a strong DQ, something. So what we wound up doing is the old, I think, full Nelson. He kicked the top turnbuckle of both of us were down. So, it was really a stupid move on my part because I still wasn't treating the business like a business. I didn't think I knew more about it than they did. Maybe I thought I could do things smarter than they did, but that was stupid. That was stupid. And, later I realized that Vince Jr. was the polar opposite of his father, the polar opposite. Not quite as classy, or he didn't care. He didn't care what people thought. He was brash. Some people cannot be embarrassed. He's one of them. You just can't embarrass him. There's nothing that could embarrass him. But with that said, I never had a problem with him. I didn't work for them when he was really in charge. He was doing the color commentary, and that's an opportunity. If you want to kill somebody in the ring, you could do it on a microphone. And he never did. He always treated me okay. So, in later years, we were always cordial. We had conversations. I knew Mrs. McMahon. We weren't friends, but, we were acquaintances. And she was always very nice. Stephanie and Shane were always really nice, respectful kids. So the difference is that Vince Sr. was a really, really outwardly classy, sophisticated guy that you could talk to. He had a heart. Vince Jr., as I see in later years, is a hard-hearted guy. Well, Vince, it's my job. It's all I got. Well, sorry. You'll have to think of something else. And there were guys, even Vince Sr. had guys that worked for him and were loyal for years and years. And if it wasn't for a guy like Bruno stepping up and going to Vince Sr. and saying, hey, what about so-and-so, man? You're starving this guy. It's Vince Jr., that would have never happened. Vince Jr. would have said, screw him. Tell him find something else to do. So, yeah, they were polar opposites.
Do you believe, as per the historical wisdom now in hindsight, all these years, that if Vince Sr. knew what Jr. had intended in terms of blowing up the NWA, destroying the territories, that he would have sold to him and brought on the whole rock and wrestling cartoon era, the national?
Yeah, you know what? I think Senior was more loyal to their finances first and foremost. I don't think he was a guy, an old timer like Frank Tunney or Sam Muchnick in St. Louis. Those guys came from the wrestling business, and some of them, Sam Muchnick or Paul Bosch, was in the ring. So they kind of felt it differently. Vince Sr. was brought up in the business. His dad was a promoter, but that's what they were, promoters. So I think the bottom line was cash for them. Although knowing Senior the way I did, I don't think he would have approved of some of the stuff that was done. Listen, I saw, and you'll have to blank me out of here if you have to. I saw Vince Jr. have his daughter Stephanie, whatever they were doing, the Attitude Era, I guess it was called, on her knees in the ring in front of him, and he's undoing his pants and stuff like that. This is his daughter. His daughter. You know, I mean, if somebody suggested that with my daughter, we're having a fight. You know, there's going to be a problem. So I don't think Vince Sr. would have gone for stuff like that. I think he would have stopped that. But I think at the end, he was just getting away from it. He gave Portland and Cape Cod to Junior to see if he could get it back, and he did. You know, they were tough towns. There were tough towns up there, and he did. So I don't think he would have approved of a lot of the things that was done morally, but he probably would have approved when he saw the bank account. So, that's possible.
Interesting. A fan sent me a question wanting to ask about your experience working with a very young Curt Hennig in 81, who went on, of course, to be Mr. Perfect and quite a master in that ring.
He turned out to be one of the very best workers in the business. He was fantastic. I worked with him when he was very young, when he first came to the WWF. And I think I might have worked with him in the Midwest once or twice. I don't recall, but I do recall working with him in the New York territory. In fact, I have a memory I think it was before one of the TV shows. We were all just hanging around. I used to take a nap on the apron because the ring lights were on. It was nice and warm, and I would just lay there for a while. And he came over. He said, "Mr. O'Hannon." I went, "Whoa, wait a minute, Mr. O'Hannon. No, I'm Davy," and introduced myself, and he introduced himself, and we were talking. And I'm sitting on the apron talking to him, and he looked at one of my knees. He went, "Oh, you had some knee surgery." I said, "Yeah, I did." "Oh," he said, "Me too." So we were talking about that, and then we wound up in a tag match on opposite sides. And I think SD Jones was his partner. I honestly don't recall who my partner was, but I did work with him, and he was easy to work with. He had a pedigree there. He had his dad, who was very good. His dad was very good in the ring, and he turned out to be one of the greatest workers in this business. And rest his soul, Curt had a problem that he didn't control, but a lot of guys did. And things were so available back then. Things were so available, and I got a warning from a guy I was really close with, Freddie Blassie, and we're in a car one night, and he said to me, "Kid," he said, "don't become a bum." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, what's going to happen is you're going to be on television. And then people are going to see you on television and say, 'Wow, you're on TV.' And then you're going to think you're a big shot. And you're going to start doing things that you normally wouldn't do." He said, "Don't do that. Separate it. Just separate it." And that was good advice. That was good advice. I was surrounded by the old timers: Dominic, Mike Cicluna, Bruno, Blassie, the captain, Ernie Roth. I mean, I was around these guys all the time, Skoland, and so I couldn't misbehave too much. As much as I'd like to, I couldn't misbehave too much because they'd kind of, after a show, we'd be in the bar. Mike Cicluna never, ever sat at a bar. He hated it. He wouldn't sit at a bar. If he was going to have a beer, take it over to a table. Bruno was such a high character guy that if there were fans, and I didn't sit at many tables with Bruno because we kayfabed. We kayfabed, and that was really serious business. But Bruno, if somebody wanted to take a picture and he had a glass of wine with dinner, he had to take the glass of wine away when the picture was taken in case any kids saw it. These guys really, we never stepped out of character, and we protected the business. Carmella could tell you all about that. She was around it, and she was around those same people. So Curt, fantastic. I was really sad when I saw what was going on with him, but he got caught up in that uh, that situation. That, listen, we used to use a muscle relaxer called a Soma. I don't remember what the name was.
Yeah.
So the philosophy was, okay, took a Soma, and that feels better. Well, if one felt good, then two will feel even better. And guys would wash it down with some kind of alcohol. Well, that's even better than that. And and you just kept going and going. I had a lot of not problems, but with painkillers, opioids, because you had to work every night. If you didn't wrestle, you didn't get paid. So you just kept the body going. Luckily when I retired, I still was addicted to them. And, my wife at one point said, okay, now it's time to grow up and you got to stop. You got to stop. I'm thinking of ways, okay, how can I get a doctor to write this prescription? The doctor in Hamburg, Pennsylvania wasn't there anymore, that would just give you stuff. So Kurt got caught up in that, and he got caught up in it before there was any control. So things were wild. Things were wild. But he was a great kid.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned a couple of times about your relationship with Bruno, but I read that you traveled with Bruno and the great Gorilla Monsoon, who Brian R. Solomon is releasing a much anticipated biography on. Can you talk about any of those interesting times that you spent on the road with those two legends?
Yeah, first of all, Gino, Gorilla Monsoon, we were very, very close. Uh, I had the honor. I wish I didn't have to do this. I was one of his pallbearers. Bobby Heenan and I, they asked us to be in the front of the casket, and Gino was the most generous guy you ever want to meet. I mean, I knew him for years. Uh, our families were friendly. Uh, Being on the road with them, Bruno was low key on the road. We did a lot of miles in the car. I used to, because I watched these guys. I got in the business when the guys that I watched were still active. So for me, it was like a fairy tale. I'm saying, wow, am I really in the car with Bruno? And I'd say to Gino or say to Mike Cicluna, you do know that back in the 60s, I hated your guts. I couldn't stand you. Freddie Blassie, I said something to him once. He said to me, were you that little son of a bitch in the Roosevelt Stadium that threw that thing at me? It might have been. I don't know. But these guys for me were bigger than life. So when we traveled, we really didn't talk about wrestling when we were traveling because it was a job. We were doing that every night. You need a break. I worked as Davy O'Hannon. My name is Hannon. The original Irish was O'Hannon, but my name was Hannon. But I'm half Italian. My mother was a Caruso. All right. So Bruno used to say, "Don't give me that Irish bullshit." He'd say, the only good part of you is the Caruso part. So Gino Morella, say, yeah. And I used to like to listen to a singer named Jimmy Rosselli, and I love Dean Martin. So I put Dean Martin or Jimmy Rosselli tape in the car, and they'd be singing in Italian, but I'd only know parts of it. And they'd both look at me and say, "You're half a Caruso. That what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?" Now, if I was on the road with just Gino, many times Dick Worley, who was a very, very dear friend, was with us. If it was Gino, Bruno, and myself and Dick, we couldn't go out together somewhere if we were still working. When Gino finally became a babyface, it was easier. It was easier. Uh, but to go out with Gino, you never, ever put your hand in your pocket. I mean, I used to try to sneak out and get the check, and he'd say to me, listen, he used to have to put his glasses down because he couldn't see. He'd lean over. He was so damn blind. And in the ring, that was dangerous, like Stan Hansen. He'd say to me, if you don't give me the check, then we're going to have a fight. Here you go, Gino. We're not having a fight. Don't you worry about that. So he was terribly generous. Dick Worley, Gino, and I pulled into a little roadside diner in Maryland once. And Gino looked at it. It was a tiny menu. Gino said to the girl, why don't you just bring one of everything on that menu and we'll see what we like. So she said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, what do you think I mean? Bring one of everything. Bring one of it. Not the desserts, not yet. We're not ready for that. Just bring all the dinners. Wait a minute. He could eat. Dick and I could eat, but not like that. Bruno, again, when he went out, was very low key, very classy, sophisticated. All those guys treated people like waitresses, wherever we were, always treated them with respect. There were some guys in the business that were, downright disrespectful to people. And I learned that I didn't want to be around them. I used to make a joke and say, you know what, there's some professional wrestlers you don't want to go out in public with. Because we used to have an expression, you're starting to live your gimmick. My wife or my kids still say every once in a while, you're not him anymore. Your Davy O is gone. Don't worry, But some guys you had to tell that to. So in the car with Bruno and Gino, we didn't talk about wrestling. I had questions. I used to question all of them. Oh, do you know so-and-so? Did you work with him? I saw you. I saw Gino and Bruno work in the old Garden. I saw them go 60 or 70 minutes in the old Madison Square Garden. I was screaming for Bruno and wanted Gino to get beat. And, Gino just came from Manchuria and Red Berry found him swimming in a river, pushing the ice things away and stuff like that. So Gino said to me once, just so you know, my mother did not name me Gorilla. Okay. So we were all close. We got to know each other's families. I knew Gino's mom and dad very well. Whenever we worked in Rochester, Gino would bring a few of us over to his mom and dad's house, and she would cook. Bruno's mom I got to know, who was an incredibly strong lady. What she did for her family during the war was unreal. And I would ask Bruno about those things. What was it like as a kid? And, what did you go through? And he would tell me that. I had asked him about a wrestler named Dr. Jerry Graham because I had a problem with him. And
didn't you punch him?
Oh, yeah, it was a good punch. But what happened was Vince was trying to bring him back and get him back to life. And Vince Sr. said to me, he said, I got to ask you to just be a baby for one night. He said, you can do your stuff, but I said, all right, whatever. And I didn't know it, but he spit on me when my back was turned, and he spit on me. So I didn't know what was going on. I'm walking back in the dressing room. George Steele says, come here, I'm going to talk to you. Okay. He said, if you ever let somebody do that to you again, we're going to have a problem. I said, do what? Do what? So he told me what happened. I said, really? I went in to get to the shower, and Bruno goes, come here. What? Same thing. He said to me, I said, Bruno, George just got me outside. I didn't know that happened. You know me well enough now that I wouldn't let that happen. So, half dressed, I start to make my way over to the other dressing room, and Skolin and Gino went, stop, back in your room, get back over there. So I didn't get to see him. It turns out that night he went to the hotel and trashed the hotel, did some of the most disgusting things that you could ever think a human would do, or you'd have to wonder if a human would do it or not. But so he got fired, and I didn't see him anymore. So 4 years or 3 years later, I was working in the Amarillo territory. And since I was a wrestling fan, I knew. But anyway, I was in the car with Rip Hawk, Swede Hansen, and Terry Funk. I think we were just going to get something to eat. And Terry says, "Hey, stop at Al Lovelock's place." Well, Al Lovelock years ago was one of the assassins, wore the mask, really, really hot tag team. They were big deals. But he owned a little bar and a hotel outside of Amarillo. So they stopped, and here's Al Lovelock in the bar. It was very early afternoon. So they introduced me. I said, "Hey, Mr. Lovelock." I said, "Geez, I know who you are." I said, "It's really a pleasure to meet you. And, I saw what you did. Got a lot of, you in the business, kid?" "Yeah, I'm about 5 years now. I'm in the business." As I'm talking, out from the back with a broom comes Jerry Graham. Al Lovelock was letting him stay for cleaning up and helping out. So, of course, old timers, Rip Hawk, Swede Hansen, and Terry, he knows them. So he comes over, he's got a cigar, and, they're talking, and I was just kind of standing back. And Terry says, "Hey, Doc," he says, "we got a new boy came in here, his name is Davy." And so he stuck his hand out, and I just kept my hands folded in front of me. And I said, "We already met." So he took the cigar. He says, "Yeah, we did." I said, "Yeah." I said, "I worked with you in New York." I said, "You spit on me, but I didn't know it." So he went, "You must have deserved it." So, since I wasn't quite as mature as I am now, I said to myself, "Well, let's finish this right up now." And I just drilled him under his ear, out cold, out cold. He didn't even. Al Lovelock went, "Oh my God, oh my God." Terry says to me, "Oh, good answer." I thought, "Well, yeah." And Swede says, "Let's go, let's go." Rip Hawk didn't say a word. He was a quiet guy. So we got back in the car. I had to, of course, tell them the story. Swede says, "Oh, why didn't you put the boots to him when he was on the floor?" I said, "No, that's right. I don't think he would have known." So that's what happened with Jerry Graham, and am I sorry I did it? I don't think I'm sorry I did it. I'm not a tough guy. I don't get in fights. I don't start stuff. I had a couple of scrapes in the business. The first one I had was just when I first came from Kansas City. I had a little scrimmage with Spiros Arion in the dressing room, and I was Bruno, Mike Cicluna, Dominic, and George Steele are sitting at a table playing cards, and I'm telling them, if any of these so-and-sos think they're going to take advantage of me, because Spiros kicked me, and I didn't know if it was intentional or not, and I'm talking away, and Dominic's got his finger, and he's going, kind of pointing. Well, Spiros was standing right behind me. I didn't know he came in. So no, I don't know if you remember Spiros Arion.
Yes.
He was a big, rugged guy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I turned around and he looked at me and he said, "New guys were called punks." He said, "Punk, you want we should go all the way now?" Oh, I did a little quick thinking and I knew what that meant. So we had a little scrimmage, but the guys broke it up really fast. Spiros and I became very close friends. I had a little dust up with Tony Parisi on the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. I stopped the car. I said, "Let's go, get out," because he was a ball buster. He would, and he. So I don't know why I was in a mood or something, and I kept telling him, "Stop, okay, stop, enough." I'm tired of hearing it. Finally, I stopped the car. "Let's go." Dominic and Mike were with us, so they let it go for a couple of seconds. Tony didn't want to fight. He wasn't a fighter, So back in the car, that was that. And then I had a little tiny thing with Rudy K up in Halifax, I think. Uh, Rudy K was an old timer. I didn't know that family very well, but I was working in the territory, the Maritimes, and
Debris.
Rudy K, boom, nailed me. So that happens. That happens. About 2 minutes later, boom, I get another one in the mouth. And, well, that felt like the first one. What's going on? So it happened 3 times, and he didn't say, "Oops, sorry," or anything like that. So when I got the chance, I turned him around. I gave him a little one, right in the mouth, and I said, "Receipt, receipt." So he said, "Then let's go." But he was a little older by then, so I just kind of glommed him, and wrapped him. I didn't want to have a fight with him. Besides that, he was one of the owners, you know. So after that, Frenchie Martin was there. I walked in the dressing room, and Frenchie says, "Well, kid, I guess that's your notice." Could be. Yeah, it turned out, yeah, it was. Yeah, it was.
That was Emile Dupree's territory.
That was the Cormier family.
Oh, Cormier family.
Yeah, Leo Burke and Rudy K and Bobby K. And I had actually gotten there because on a Japan trip, Bobby K, who was one of the brothers, said to me, "You got to come to my territory when you're done in Japan." So I said, "Oh, great. All right. I'll do that. Where is it?" He says, "Nova Scotia." He says, "Some long rides." Yeah, he's not kidding. Some long rides. Holy crap. But so I shook hands with him and committed. And when I got home from Japan a day later, Billy Graham called me and he said, "I'm down in Charlotte." He said, "They had a plane crash." He said, "Do your hair and come on down." He said, "The guys in the middle are making $3,500 to $4,000 a week." He said, "You got to come down." I said, "Billy, I just gave my word to Bobby K to go up to Canada." He said, "No, call him and tell him no," but I wouldn't do that. I gave my word. We very seldom had written contracts except for overseas. I said, "No, I'm going up." So I went up to Canada and starved to death until Rudy K threw me out of the territory. And the guys in Charlotte and the Mid-Atlantic were making big, big money. Big money. But, that's showbiz.
That's how it goes. As a heel, you were known for really drawing heat from the crowd. Did you have a special way to get them so riled up? And how did you balance staying safe, especially back in that era when heels would get stabbed, sliced? And you, I guess, had a situation similar to that with a barbershop razor, correct?
Yep. Right. Can't see it right there on my arm going out of the ring. Actually, I had some beach days, so it's shiny now that I'm a little more tan. But anyway, what you know what I developed the philosophy in the ring. And I said, if I'm going to be a heel, which I was, I said a heel's got to have 3 elements. You have to be sneaky, so you can get the jump on the baby face. You have to be vicious once you get on him, and you have to be a coward when it's time for a comeback. And the fans cannot stand a 6 foot, 260-pound, sneaky, vicious coward. They can't stand that. Okay. The other part is, and I don't watch any wrestling. I've seen some independent guys that spend more time arguing with the fans and looking at them. All you needed to do was take a look. Once in a while I'd say, "Why don't you shut your mouth? Be quiet." But I was in a fight in the ring. That was what we were supposed to be conveying to the fans. So I didn't want to kill that illusion. I was in a fight. So if I turned to the fans, it was only for a split second, and if I was being vicious, I never stopped and yelled at the people. I didn't pick my foot up to stomp when I hit somebody. Now, you wouldn't do that if you were on the street and somebody attacked you. You wouldn't do that. You'd have to. So I would do that, and your expression is as much a part of your equipment that than your wrestling is. So that's why it's so hard to work with a mask. It takes all your expression away. I just showed somebody a picture, and unfortunately, when we switched computers, I lost a whole bunch of pictures. I got to rescan. But my wife grew up in Philadelphia. She came to a wrestling match. She had no idea about wrestling. With a very dear friend of hers. And after the matches in Philadelphia one night, we went out for pizza. And, I got to know her, and one thing led to another. And almost 50 years later, here we are, still married.
Congratulations.
Which, thank you, which is really strange in the wrestling business.
Absolutely.
Anyway, she put up with that stuff, and, our kids turned out okay. But I worked in the Spectrum in Philadelphia one night. It was a big show. It was like the Garden. Spectrum put 20,000 people in. So I worked in the Spectrum, and the next day I had to go to a matinee in Delaware. So my wife stayed at her parents' house in Philadelphia. So we got finished, and I finally came home to pick her up in her house, in her dad's house in Philadelphia. So I got there, and her father answered and she had absolutely, my in-laws were the most wonderful people you could ever ask for. They were fantastic. Anyway, my father-in-law answers the door, and he's got the Philadelphia Daily News in his hand. And he's got it, I thought it was just a newspaper. So I banged on the door, and he opened it up, and he looked at me and he said, "You're in big trouble, pal." I went, "What am I in?" It's like promoters, and I'm saying to myself, what did I do now? So he's got a picture of me in the Spectrum, and I got a reverse headlock on somebody, but I'm making this really crazy face, which goes back to the discussion, expression. I was in the middle of the ring in a hold, not doing anything except holding onto the guy's head, but I was having some expression for the fans. But the caption said, Davy O'Hannon was asked to imitate his mother-in-law. My father-in-law says, "Hey, you might have a little problem here with this." So, they were joking, of course, but that was a big part of it. If you could project a cocky attitude or a nasty attitude, or, I would sometimes just look at the people and shake my head. My wife says it now. We'd be talking or something and disagree, and she'd say, "You're making a face." "No, I'm not." She said, "Yes, you are. You're making a face. Don't make a face." Well, stuff like that. And we don't have any big battles here. But to be a heel, that's what you have to do. I see the new guys, as soon as they get in the ring, they're standing on the top rope. Everybody's flying around. I don't even know what's going on. But I was watching a match one night with Bugsy McGraw, Don Fargo, and I were standing there. And Don Fargo says to me, "Who's the heel?" I said, "I don't have any idea. I don't have any," because they're all yelling at the fans. Well, aren't you supposed to be in a wrestling match? If you went to St. Louis and worked for Sam Muchnick, he'd say to you, "Do not go out of the ring. Do not do something to get disqualified. You are a professional athlete who's supposed to be in a contest and you want to win. So don't, now he knew he was in the business. So a heel did his stuff, and if it was part of your finish or something, you went outside, but you had to wrestle. The other part of it was I was a heel, and a lot of us have that ego. I don't know what actor said once when somebody asked him, "Well, why do you want to be an actor?" And he went, "Look at me, look at me." Okay, that's what we want. Look at us. If I'm out on the floor, there's only a few people can look at me. Up in the ring, everybody can look at me. So my philosophy was, I'm in a fight. I have to do everything I can to beat this guy up. I'm not going to be nice to those people because I don't want them to like me anyway. So sometimes with just an expression, sometimes one word, shut up. Oh, don't tell me to shut up. You'd get to the baby face and say, I got him. I got him. Or if I had somebody like Manny Soto or Pete Sanchez or Johnny Rods who could be really hot baby faces and you'd put a nerve hold on them, that was easy, because all you needed was one shut up. Somebody'd say, let's go, Johnny. Johnny's not going anywhere. And you grab them. And it's so easy to control the crowd because if somebody said, let's go, Johnny, there's 3 beats. Let's go, Johnny. 4 beats. Let's go. So if you bounced a little bit, they started. And you get them right out of their seat, especially with a baby face that had some fire. And Strongbow was great. He'd shake that head. All you had to do was grab that neck. He'd shake it. You'd lean over, say, we got him, Joe. We got him. But not yet. Hair down, start again.
Mm-hmm.
And for Strongbow, they do the tom-tom thing. And he'd get going. And eventually, you knew it was time for his comeback. And, he had all that hair, so he could kind of put it in his face. He'd say, I think it's time. Yeah, I think it is time, Joe. Let's go. Chop, chop, boom, boom. The heel, couple of big bumps. When you come off the ropes, the sleeper or the chop, whatever it was, the people going crazy. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that a lot of that psychology that made the business so great is gone in whatever you want to call the current product, which kind of dovetails nicely. Ibsen is asking, he's watching the interview and he's asking, are you upset that kayfabe is gone? I don't know if you've heard about this new Netflix thing that WWE are putting out called Unreal, where they go a step further and they put you right in the writer's room and they talk about who's going to win here and blah, blah, blah. But just in general, in terms of the death of kayfabe in the early 90s and what we have today.
Yeah, I mean, it upset all of us because a big part of our life was protecting that business, so we lived it. My family, listen, there was a long, and I don't like to talk about it. And if my wife ever heard me talking about it, she'd really disapprove. People know how we used to get some color or get some blood. Okay. For the longest time, my family didn't know that. I didn't tell them back when it was protected. Back when, so we were as serious as we could be about protecting that. I mean, as close as I was with Bruno, if I walked into a diner and he was there, I turned around and walked out. If you worked for Eddie Graham in Florida and you walked into a place to eat and you were a heel and there were baby faces there, if you didn't leave and he found out, you're fired. If you were a heel and went to a nightclub in Florida, and that was some great territory, if you went to a nightclub and some wise guy said, hey, you're one of those phony wrestlers, let's go, and you had a fight and you got beat up, you also got fired.
The Bill Watts thing.
Oh, Bill Watts was wild. Bill Watts was a maniac about it, but it was good because we protected it at all costs. And people would say, oh, come on, you're telling me that's all real? No, I'm not telling you anything. Well, isn't that fake? So depending on who it was and how they said it, there were different answers. Come on, that stuff's all fake. Oh, really? Well, I'll tell you what, there's one sure way for you to find out if I'm fake. It'll only take about 30 seconds. Don't worry. Or, if they persisted, oh, come on. And if it was an older fan, say, come on, you guys, say, Yeah, it is. Really? Well, you asked me a question. I just answered you. Yes, it is. No, well, I'd say, and especially that guy, San Martino. He's the biggest phony there. No, he's not. No, she's not. They go crazy. I did it once. I met, rest his soul, Ilio DiPaolo once. Great guy. So I would think it was by his restaurant. Some guy said, "Oh yeah, that phony wrestler." I said, "Oh yeah, that Ilio. He was one of the worst." No, he's not. Yeah. So yeah, I was upset by it. It bothers me. It bothers me. To this day, there's things I do to protect it. Vince Sr. put the Golden Terror mask on me on and off. We were doing it, and he said to me, "Listen, I'm going to trust you not to talk about this." This is the first time I'm ever actually saying it because people knew that it was me sometimes. He said to me, "I'm going to trust you to never tell anybody the details about this, why it's being done." What I said, "You got it." And to this day, I kept my word. I don't. But I still say to somebody, "Well, you know what? Johnny Valentine used to say, I can't convince you about what you see on TV, but I can convince you that I'm not a fake." If you want to do that. So I still protect it. And the answer is yeah. I was really upset by it because we worked so hard to do it. And it still bothers me because I think that took that little bit of mystery out of the business. And I just read not too long ago, I think, I'm not positive, might have been Shakespeare said, "The theater is an illusion. And when you take the illusion away, you take the theater away."
Mm-hmm.
So we had an illusion. We gave the people a chance to suspend their disbelief. And I can say it because I was a big fan and it was special. I loved it. I loved cheering the good guys. I loved booing. I'd go to school and my friends would say, "Oh, well, what happened? Oh, you should have seen Bruno." And Baba the Giant was behind him and he put the sleeper on Bruno on the interviews. And as Bruno was going to sleep, he said, "Remember Pearl Harbor?" And I was at home watching the television screaming. A few years later, here I am in a car with Bruno, or I'm working for Baba in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was a dream. For me, it was a dream. I'll steal. Razor Ramon said once, "Hard work pays off. Dreams do come true. Bad times don't last, but bad guys do."
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Cool.
Dreams come true. And so kayfabe is still in my heart, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And my contemporaries that were fortunate enough to see the product back in the day also agree they've really killed the magic in a lot of ways. Ibsen is asking memories of two Hall of Famers, Andre the Giant first, and then he's asking about Pat Patterson.
Oh,
have any interactions with those two?
Well, yeah, Andre. I traveled with Andre. I worked with him. Andre came to all the territories, and he'd be on lease from Vince for a week. So I worked with Andre many times. He was, for us, he was a great guy, a good friend. He absolutely hated being in public, not in the ring. He liked being the Giant. He liked that, but he didn't like being the Giant in front of the people away from wrestling because he couldn't have a normal life. He couldn't go to a movie. We would sometimes be in a territory, nothing to do during the day, go to a movie. He didn't fit in the seat. He'd go to a hotel. If they had a king bed, he had to lay corner to corner if he fit. So many things he couldn't do. With us, he wasn't a freak. He was just Andre. That's all. So that's why I loved it. Talk about kayfabe. There's a guy that really protected it. I mean, if he even saw a dressing room door open and somebody peek in, unreal, unreal. Uh, I never saw Andre in all the years sign an autograph. He just wouldn't do it. Uh, I don't know. A lot of people remember him. Uh, he was a giant. You could pass a $50 through his ring. This guy was enormous, but he had a lonely life. He had a lonely life. I just told, we had company last night. My wife's sister and my brother-in-law were here. We went out to a local place, and in front of me there was a sign for drinks that said grasshoppers. Okay, so I told my brother-in-law, I said, and my wife goes, "Oh no, not another wrestling story," because she's really wrestled out. She doesn't want to hear them. But grasshopper, there was a place that we used to go to after the shows in the Westchester County Center in White Plains, New York. And Arnold Skolin was friends with the guy there, but great steaks, good food. So we're at the bar one night, and Andre was a pretty serious drinker. He went on a diet once, stopped beer, so he drank a couple of gallons of vodka a day. Don't ask me why. But we sit down at the bar and we order steaks, and Andre orders drinks, and I'm sitting next to him. And I went to the bartender, I'll have a grasshopper on the rocks. And I heard Andre's glass go on the bar, and he went, "What?" I said, What? He said, "What did you order?" I said, "I ordered a grasshopper." He said, get up off the seat." So, that's Andre. I'm only Davy. I'm going to get up off the seat. I get off. He says, "Go sit over there." I went, "Why?" He said, "I'm not sitting with somebody who's drinking a grasshopper." I said, "What?" He said, "Just sit over there." He and Skolin were pretty serious drinkers. So Andre was great. He was a generous guy. He was great with us. He was cordial to the fans if we were out, but he hated it. He hated it because he was never left alone. He was never left alone. So, he had a lonely life, really. He had a lot of attention, and if you could understand him being lonely, it was because he couldn't be normal like a lot of people. So that was tough. That was tough for him. Pat Patterson, I had a great relationship with him. He's one of the best workers ever in the business. The guy was a master in the ring. The other stuff you heard about him when he was working in the office rooms, I can't comment on it. I don't know if it happened. I know that Pat Patterson was always nice to me, cordial. Yeah, he was gay. Okay. Bruno wouldn't talk to him. Bruno was that, tough old Italian. So didn't believe in things. We were in Pittsburgh, and the Howard Johnson's at the airport in Pittsburgh, and at closing time they'd close up the blinds and let us stay for a while. So there were people in there. There was music playing, and a young guy and his girlfriend are up there dancing. And Pat Patterson, myself, I think Tony Atlas, a bunch of us are sitting in there drinking, and Pat says, "I'm going to go dance." So he walks over and he says, "Do you mind if I cut in?" So the guy says, "Oh, no, go ahead." Pat starts dancing with the guy. The girl is standing there. "Oh, Pat, I'm not sure everybody's going to but it was a joke. He was making a joke. Everybody got a laugh out of it. We were at the Allentown Fairgrounds, which used to be a big show every year outside. They put almost 20,000 people in there, and it was a battle royal. So Skolin comes, and there's a big dressing room, and he says, "All right," he says, "listen, I want the heels to go out this way. I want the babies to go out this way." And Pat Patterson says, "Well, I go both ways. Where do you want me to go?" So that kind of stuff. You'll hear bad stories. I never saw them. All I saw was Pat as a wrestler, and a really good one. I had some fantastic matches with him. I was a heel, of course. He was a baby, and it was easy. a compliment when you walk back in the dressing room after a match. If the boys were in there and somebody said to you, "Hey, sounded good," sounded good. That was a compliment. Or you'd both come in and look at each other and say, "Easy, huh?" "Yep, easy."
Mm-hmm.
And you knew you had a good match. I always had a good one with Pat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You were part of the Pro Wrestling USA experiment between Crockett and the AWA. Wanted to ask you about what you were thinking when that deal went down, in terms of were you of the view that this was going to be a solid competition for New York, and what was your experience like there?
I didn't pay a lot of attention to the promotion. The AWA had a really, really good reputation. Everybody wanted to go to Minneapolis to work. I kind of, once again, blew my chance to go to Minneapolis because I did something with Vern on a trip to Japan that, if you wanted to hear about it, I'd tell you. But so I didn't pay a lot of attention to the promotion, but the boys were saying, Charlotte Mid-Atlantic was a great place to work. That was a really good place to work. We used to joke, the people south of the Mason-Dixon, there were two things they were worried about. It was racing and wrestling. They were happy with that. So we thought it was going to be a pretty good challenge. But at the time, Minneapolis was such a solid place. Was such a solid place that a lot of us really didn't pay attention. If you got your bookings, you made sure you got paid, what you expected or what you agreed to. So I really did not. I'd be telling you a lie if I made something up about the intricacies going on there, because I really didn't pay attention to them.
Fair enough. But speaking again of Pro Wrestling USA, Ibsen is asking about how Bob Backlund was as a person towards you.
Oh, he used to call me Mr. O'Hannon. I'd say to him, Bobby, no, I'm just Davey. Don't do it. I worked with him in St. Louis. He actually dislocated my thumb. He was the strongest person I ever met. Accidentally. He didn't do it on purpose. And unfortunately, he's having a really big problem right now. And who knows why that stuff starts, or what causes it. We were invited to my wife and I were invited to Angelo Savoldi's 95th birthday party up where he lives. And Bob Backlund was there. He came. So at the table was my wife, myself, Bobby Backlund, and I don't know who else. Another, couple of people were sitting there, and Bob was sitting next to my wife, and we're talking, and he says, "Davey, didn't we work in St. Louis?" Oh, so I said, I held my hand up. I said, "Yeah, we did work in St. Louis. If you remember, see that little lump there?" But he was always very cordial to me. He was overly respectful. At one point, he started his own little promotion up in New England. And he had me come up for a whole series of matches against him. So outside the ring, he was great. He was a polite guy. He was sort of introverted, again, except for us. But when he met people, he was outwardly very happy to meet people. He was a good guy. I'm really sorry he's having this problem now.
Yeah, sad situation. A fan sent me a question talking about, you truly traverse so many territories internationally, et cetera, et cetera. Now, separating paydays out, which you may be unable to do, but if you had to pick your favorite territory to work, what would it be, just from your what you were able to do in the ring, etc., what would that be?
Well, New York was always special because there was always big crowds in New York, and New York had all the big buildings, not all, but you'd have the Cap Center in Washington, the Baltimore Civic Center, the Garden, the Spectrum, the Boston Garden, the New Haven Coliseum. You had the Maple Leaf Garden and the Forum up in Montreal. So New York was kind of special to work in because of the atmosphere. Down south, Mid-Atlantic was a really great place to work because the people were so invested in it. It was personal. When you got to the NWA territories, your work was personal to those people, really personal. They took it to heart. If I'm working in Amarillo, and I get on that promo for the day, and I'm knocking. I had the Texas brass knuckles belt, so that was always when you had a brass knucks match. It was always a rather colorful night, So I took the belt and I put some blood on it once, and I did a promo the next day because I was going to work with Dory Funk in a tag match someplace. And I held up the belt and I said, "You see this? This is the blood from Dory Funk Sr. And here's what I think of that." Tooey on the belt, and I threw it down and I said, "There's not a Funk in the world that could carry my jock to the ring." I said, "No less wrestle me." I said, "If you could dig that old man up and bring him back, and you put the Punk Funk, who's Terry, and the other Funk, and bring him in," I said, "I'll just beat him up all at once, get it over with, and blah, blah, blah." Well, let me tell you, Dory is standing behind a counter giving me the good thumbs up. This is going to be good. Well, it's going to be good, except they're going to try to kill me. And that's what happened. I worked with a guy who I watched who was a legend, Ricky Romero, good-looking Mexican guy, and he was over like $1 million. He was over like $1 million. I had a Texas death match with him in Colorado, someplace, Pueblo or Colorado Springs, or I don't know where. Anyway, I had to fight my way out of the ring. I mean, literally fight. Somebody almost had their fingers in my eye. Boom, boom, boom. I was fortunate. They put the Western States Tag Team belt on myself and my partner Dennis Stamp, who was a great shooter, a great mind for the business. He was a little eccentric. No, he was a lot eccentric, but he was a great guy in the ring. And we had
immortalized forever in Beyond the Mat too.
There you go. I'm not booked. Yep. And Dennis was, Dennis and I spent how many hours together traveling, living together. Anyway, Dennis and I were at a tag match with, I might have been Dory Jr. and Reggie Parks, who was another really popular guy. And I think we were in Lubbock, Texas. And, we were working, but we had done the promos for that day. And these people were hot. And I got Dennis in the ring. I said, "Dennis, we really got to watch our backs here." I said, "Because this thing is starting to boil." And, we had one of them tied up in the rope by the neck, and they were selling like crazy. And we got rid of the referee, and we hopped out, and we were doing something on the floor. And some guy came running down from the bleachers, and he landed a punch on Dennis Stamp's eye like you can't even believe. Whoa, here we go. And we wound up having to fight our way out of there. And it happened in a lot of places. It happened when I was teamed with Mike Cicluna in New York once against Haystacks and Kevin Sullivan. And walking out of the ring, some fan took one of the metal chairs and cracked Mike on the top of the head, for 10 or 12 stitches worth. just opened them up. So, uh, you know, that was our job to get the fans going. That was our job to get them going. And, you know, certain guys you could do it. Certain baby faces had heat, knew how to sell. So the fans thought they were dying. Fans thought they were dying, and they were going to help. So I liked the territories that were a little bit smaller than New York. I really liked Amarillo. I liked Kansas City. That was kind of neat. The Maritimes were really good. There was a town, maybe it was called Bridgeton, I think, Bridge something. And we went in there, and these people were so hot that the mercenaries, Frenchie Martin and Michel Martel, and myself and Bugsy McGraw had Andre tied up in the ropes during a battle royal. And we were wailing on him. And I hear Frenchie say, "Uh-oh, here they come." And out of the other side, 5 or 6 people are hopping in the ring. RCMP wasn't quick enough. And so now we're in a battle. And Frenchie reaches into his trunks and he pulls out a chain. I said, "Where were you hiding that thing? Where'd you get that?" "Don't worry." And he starts doing this, and one of the cops dropped his nightstick, so I picked it up, and we had to fight our way back. They were saving Andre, and you know why? Because the illusion was we were going to really hurt him, and that's what we wanted to do. We don't like people punching us in the face or putting cigarettes out on our back or cutting us or. I came home one night, my wife said, "What's on your hip?" I said, "Well, that's a lady stuck a nail file in my hip on the way out. I had to get a couple
another day at the office."
Yeah, I had to get a couple of stitches in my hip. So I liked the Garden. I liked working in New York, but I liked the smaller territories where it was more personal. More personal.
Yeah, absolutely. That is really, really missing again in today's product. Davey, I feel like I could go on for hours with you. Feel like we're just scratching the surface, but I wanted to ask you to close on. You had such an incredible career as you've shared today. 18 years, 3,000 matches plus. If you had to boil it down to something that you were most proud of, what would that be?
I always, without exception, 100% in the ring every night. I never cut corners. When I was hurt, I took drugs so I didn't have to cut corners because I thought the people paid for their ticket and maybe somebody had to save for a month to come and see a wrestling match. Maybe somebody couldn't afford to go all the time. Like I got to go. We weren't a rich family, but, so the people paid to come and see us. So that's why I said in the beginning, never, ever a cartoon. That's number one. And even though I was a heel and I projected my disdain for the fans, never once did I call a fan a mark. They're not marks. My generation of guys called them the people. We didn't even say the fans. We called them the people. Mike Ciclune would say, "How many peeps tonight?" You look out, a lot of them. Any people. The people look a little hot tonight. They come back in, somebody'd say, "Easy crowd. Easy. The people are good. They're a little tough tonight." So I was proud that every single night I gave 100%. I gave the same performance in Madison Square Garden, in the Maple Leaf Gardens, in Chicago Stadium that I did in Chicoutimi or the tiniest towns, Bangor, wherever it was. I'm leaning back. There's a poster on the wall here from the Hereford Bull Barn in Hereford, Texas, and I'm working with a guy named Pez Watley. Pez was a great athlete. He was a hot baby face. Pez and I gave them 45 minutes. It was a small place. There was only 2,000 people there. It was a little tiny place. And we gave them the same product we would have given them for TV in Dallas or for the Forum in Montreal or the Forum in California. So I never shortchanged the people. So I'm proud of that.
As you should be. Very, very old school. Davey, where can the fans find you on social media? I know you have a Facebook account, etc., and I'm sure they love to give you a follow because you really talk about some choice historical stuff there.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. I'm not terribly sophisticated with the computer. Like I said, my kids just gave us the laptop. You know, my one son said, "You still use a desktop?" Well, yeah, okay, no more. So they set it up, and well, here's a really quick story. They came down. My son and daughter-in-law came down to set up the desktop and make it wireless with the printer. All right, we have 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter, and my son went up where I am in the loft. There's a couple of wrestling posters, but my wife says, hang them in the storage. So there's one behind me, I think, over there somewhere, and this one. That's enough wrestling reminder. But anyway, they set up the computer or the laptop for me, and he hollers down the stairs, come on up, I'll show you what to do here. And as we're coming up, I could hear the printer going. So I thought naturally he printed something to show me. And coming off, he takes the paper out and he hands it to me. My wife is on the steps behind me. And I looked at it and I said, "What is a strange looking picture? What is this?" So I turned it over, and it's a picture of, I think it's called a sonogram. And it says, Baby Hannon arriving August 2025. So it's a picture of our first grandchild.
Oh, cool.
So anyway, I'm on social media because I have the laptop still, or now. And yeah, I'm on that. And I try to answer all the fans, and you could tell if somebody's got a bit of an edge to them or an attitude, but I always thank them for watching us, because without the fans, there's no wrestlers. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you did. Bruno was a megastar. Hulk was a megastar. But without the fans, who are they? Bruno's a construction guy. Hulk is still playing a guitar in a bar. Davey stayed in the newspaper business, and so many of the guys would have nothing. So yeah, I appreciate it. So I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook as Davy O'Hannon. It's easy to find. I don't have a, what's it called? TikTok, X. I don't do any of that stuff.
All that other stuff. Instagram, no. I think.
No, don't do any of that.
The kids love. Yeah, I don't use them either. So
yeah, I do. I go up, every day I look at Facebook. My one son says, "Oh, you're going up to the computer. You do your bills," which I just did before you and I got together. Do my bills, and you look to see which of your friends have died lately. Yeah, well, unfortunately, that's becoming more and more frequent. But yeah, so when the fans reach out to me on Facebook, I do respond. And I'll answer pretty much any question. And like I'm an old school guy. We never sold a picture or anything like that. Some guy a while back said to me, where can I buy a picture? I said, I don't know. And somebody told me on eBay there's pictures. I said, why don't you just private message me your address? So I sent him a picture. He said, what do I owe you? I said, no. I said, in my day, we appreciated somebody asking for an autograph. That's a compliment. That's a compliment. Maybe you hated me. If you hated me, mission accomplished. You're supposed to hate me. But I appreciated the fans, and so I'm on Facebook.
Well, once again, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. Big fan of the territories. I do a lot of, or try to do, a lot of documenting the territories on this channel, and it was absolutely fascinating. So thank you once again, and we'll keep in touch.
Well, thank you. It's I'm very humbled and flattered that you would even think to ask me, because I'm only Davy, but I appreciate it. And thanks very much. I hope you weren't disappointed.
Absolutely not. Fans, that's it for this edition of the Cheap Heat Productions podcast with Irish Davy O'Hannon. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time. Thank you for watching this video. Please give it a like if you enjoyed it. Be sure to follow us on all social media platforms at Cheap Heat Productions. Don't forget to hit the notification button, and you won't miss any of our upcoming interviews, recurring programs,